Hello everyone, I've missed you. Congratulations on getting through Unit 9. This is Mrs. K. So again, if my voice is familiar to you, that's because I am your teacher normally. Otherwise, if your teacher is Mrs. Foy or Mr. K, I'm sure that they miss you as well. They'll be making their own lessons later throughout the unit. So this new unit is Unit 10. Ecology. Today's lesson is going to be Introduction to Ecology with a little side spin-off of species interactions, okay? Please still take notes throughout this. There will be a quiz at the end of this unit, just like the last, so make sure you're writing down key concepts and vocabulary terms. That way when that quiz comes around, you are ready for it. All right, so again, this is 10.1, Introduction to Ecology, and this is for e-learning May 6th, A day, and e-learning May 7th, B day. Since yesterday was May the 5th, happy Cinco de Mayo, and since before that was May 4th, May the 4th be with you. So let's get started. So what is ecology? Well, ecology is one of my favorite subjects personally, and it is the study of the relationships and or interactions between organisms and their physical environment. So the image to the right is a herd of mule deer, and they interact with each other. They interact with the soils and vegetations and water. So ecology is studying how they interact with themselves and other living things, as well as themselves and non-living things. Here's a little joke image about observing things in their natural environment. So these are, maybe an image of a college area watching engineering students or engineers in their natural habitat. Haha. Anyways, why should we study ecology? Why do we care? Why is this maybe more or less interesting than maybe cellular biology or molecular genetics? Well, ecology helps us understand natural processes. It helps us recognize our relationships between humans and nature. Believe it or not, humans get a lot of services for free from nature. We get water purification systems through soil, moving water through and absorbing certain nutrients and pollutions. Nature naturally produces certain foods that we collect or has an environment which we can farm food on. The environment does a good job of cleaning our air, as we learned in the past with the carbon cycle. Trees take in carbon dioxide. They use that carbon as nutrients and to fuel their photosynthesis process, and then they spit out oxygen as a byproduct, so they're reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. The environment also plays a big role on climate. So ecology just generally helps us keep the planet livable for future generations. That is, if we take appropriate action. If we were to just study ecology and then do nothing about it, well, that would be pointless. So I guess the main point of studying ecology and understanding how it works is so that way we can make actions if need be. So since a few days ago was May the 4th, and May the 4th be with you, I want you to think back to a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, more specifically just the beginning of this school year and in this class. Okay, we talked about something called ecological hierarchy. An ecological hierarchy, if that rings any bells, is basically a hierarchical system of putting things from smallest to largest. We talked about atoms. Several atoms make a molecule. Several molecules make macromolecules, things like proteins and lipids and amino acids, and all of those things combine to form organelles like cell membranes or nucleuses. And organelles then build cells. Cells are the smallest unit of life. Then those cells work together to make tissues. Several tissues make an organ. Several organs working together make an organ system. And several organ systems working together ultimately make an organism. Yay for those of you who remembered that. If not, that's fine. An organism is one individual within a population. So if you look in the top right, you see this big, beautiful, majestic bull African elephant. He is alone. He is an individual. However, if he were to find his herd and there was several individuals of the same species, we would have a population. And a population is a group of organisms of the same species and the same location. So ecology as a whole is a pretty broad subject. So if you're interested in studying it, there are certain specialties that you could go into, one of which is population ecology. And as a population ecologist, you'd be able to study why populations grow and shrink over time. So why, specific elephant herds may increase their population over time or shrink their population over time due to climate trends or human impacts. And then population ecologists can use that information to kind of come up with plans to help, save endangered or threatened species and help those populations recover. So it's pretty neat. Continuing on with our ecological hierarchy, starting way back from the little itty-bitty atom, it doesn't quite end with population. So we learned an organism is an individual. Several individuals of the same species, again, make a population. Well, several populations end up making a community. So all of the different populations of different living species in the same location, living things interacting with living things, is a community. So how the reticulated giraffes interact with the common wildebeest, or how the lion interacts with the Thompson's gazelles, or how the one lonely ostrich in the image interacts with any of the species already mentioned. Okay, so it's living things, living populations interacting with other living things and other populations. So when you have several communities working together, you end up having an ecosystem. An ecosystem is populations of different species and the physical environment in a location. So interactions between living and non-living things. It's not just what the giraffe does with the Thompson's gazelle, it's now what the wildebeest and how it interacts with the soil and the water and the non-living factors in an ecosystem. Okay? So to expand on like specific areas of study within ecology or, potential careers that you might be interested in, there's also something called community ecologists. So community ecologists studies how species interact with each other between community members and how many of each of these species are within their community. And then there's ecosystem ecologists, which kind of shows the energy and materials and how they flow through the ecosystem and how the physical environment affects the living stuff there. Okay, so if there's not enough specific minerals, well then there's not going to be enough nutrients for grass to grow. And if there's not enough grass to grow, then the herbivores won't have enough things to eat. And if there's not enough herbivores around, well then the lions are going to have a problem. So community ecologists kind of look at the interactions between populations to see, how do lions affect the wildebeest populations? But ecosystem ecologists look at like energy and material flow. So without, material A, then material B can't be made and it affects the entire system. Then lastly, but not leastly, we have a biosphere. And a biosphere is the regions of Earth, so the surface, the atmosphere, the water, and it being occupied by the living organisms. Okay, so you could see kind of what we were looking at so far today. You have your individual organism, and that individual within the same species forms a population. That population of a species can then form a community with other populations of species. Several communities near each other make an ecosystem. Ecosystems make a biome, and then a biome make a biosphere. So now that we've reviewed ecological hierarchy and how that fits in with ecology, let's go over some more ecology terminology, starting with habitat and niche. Okay, a habitat is the physical place where an organism lives out its life. It's got everything that it needs to live and succeed. So it's got food, it's got water, it's got shelter. Okay, your habitat right now might be, your parents' house. So your parents' house has, places where you get your food. It's got a roof over your head. It's got materials to stay warm. It's got a little corner or a toilet for you to go to the bathroom. That could be a habitat. A habitat could also be a hamster cage. It's a small, sad cage, but it's got the bedding for it to stay warm and the food that you give to it every day, hopefully, and the water that you give to it every day. So it's got everything that it needs to live a nice, long life. But a habitat can also be a 100-acre territory, that a tiger in, Asia occupies, and it's got its food and its water and its, places to stay warm and cozy as well. But a habitat is just the physical place where an organism lives out its life. Then we've got niche. It's a weird word. It's spelt kind of weird. It's said kind of weird, but it's pronounced niche. And it's all of the strategies and adaptations a species uses in its environment. A niche is also seen as an ecological role or a job. Some specifics with niche is it includes how a species feeds, finds shelter, and reproduces. It includes both biotic, which means living, and abiotic, which means non-living factors. And also, only one species can inhabit a niche because of limited resources. So if two species only hunted the same animal, well, they're going to end up competing with each other. So they need to actually fall into their own niche. So they only eat that kind of animal at certain times of years, or they also happen to eat other animals as backup foods, things like that. The image below shows an example of niches through resource partitioning. So species alter their use of the niche to avoid direct competition by dividing the resources among them. So the image shows a bunch of various species of water birds. Okay, the flamingos being on the far left, they have a very specific niche because they eat vegetation and materials off of a deeper waterbed source. So the plovers on the far right can't reach those areas, so the flamingos get to have an all-you-can-eat buffet of that area without competing with others. Moving up to shallower water, we have ducks. They're competing with things slightly shallower than the flamingos, but not quite as shallow as the abiotic, or however you pronounce that word. The oyster catchers are eating things just barely in the water and kind of deep in the sand. And the plovers are just eating, very superficial things on top of the sand. So even though they're kind of occupying the same area along like a beach or a water source, they're all competing, well, not really competing, they're all gathering different materials to reduce competition. The next term we're going to cover is carrying capacity. And carrying capacity is the number of living organisms an ecosystem can support without environmental degradation, okay? Without the environment being damaged or having negative effects because of the number of organisms. So an example of which would be this image. So if you have a bowl of fish, which please never put goldfish in a bowl, read up on their living conditions that they need. One goldfish actually needs like a 20-gallon tank. So putting it in a bowl is actually kind of horrible for it because they just pee so much. But anyways, this is still a decent example. So putting a few fish in a bowl is going to be fine. There's enough space for them to move around. There's enough clean water for them to, breathe from and drink, and they have all the resources that they need to be healthy and happy. However, if you put too many goldfish or fish in a bowl, well, there's not going to be enough water for them to swim around in. They're going to not have enough food for everyone to eat happily. They're going to pee and poop so much that instead of breathing and drinking water, they're just going to be breathing and drinking poop, and it's going to be a horrible, dead, smelly fish nightmare. Okay, so a carrying capacity for a fish tank, might be just a few fish instead of a lot, or a carrying capacity for, a 1-acre agricultural grazing field might be 2 or 3 cows, where the grass can recover at the rate that the cows are eating it. So the cows are still happy and fat and eating, and the grass is still growing. But if you put 100 cows on the acre, then of course the cows are going to eat the grass way too fast. The grass is not going to be able to grow. The cows are going to poop way too much, causing what grass that can grow to be covered in poop and not be able to grow from that. Their hooves are going to do damage to the soil. Their poop is going to run off in the nearby streams, polluting that at a rate at which the stream can't naturally clean it. And we're going to have a nightmare. The cows will eventually die off until they reach a population level that the ecosystem or the environment can recover and then allow that population to sustain itself. So this slide should have been a slide or two ago, and I apologize, but some more terminology is biotic and abiotic factors. So biotic is factors that are living components of an ecosystem. So things like plants, animals, bacteria, things that are living, okay? Then we have abiotic. Abiotic are factors that are non-living and components of an ecosystem. So things like temperature, climate, light, soil, minerals, oxygen, things that are non-living but are still used by living components. Things that, may still be relied on for the biotic factors to live and continue. So I'd like you to take a moment to look at the image above and name 3 biotic living and 3 abiotic non-living factors in the above ecosystem. Okay, so take a minute to do that on Edpuzzle and give your answers there. Then I'd like you to do the same thing for this image. So name 3 biotic, again living, and 3 abiotic, non-living factors of the image above. So the last few slides we've gone over the intro to ecology stuff, frequent terms that are used in ecology, and terms that you'll be seeing throughout the rest of this unit. But now we're going to get started on our next kind of topic within ecology, and that is species interactions and ecological relationships. Okay, so in the top left image, we're seeing several species interacting with each other. We're seeing a dog with a cute smile, and a fluffy cat, and several chickens, little chicks, and they're all interacting nicely and calmly and friendly with each other. Then on our top right image, we have a cheetah, and this cheetah looks like he's super excited to give this gazelle a hug, another kind of species interaction. But maybe he didn't really want to give the gazelle a hug, but we'll talk about that in the next few slides. So in ecology and, interactions between different species and stuff, there are several different kinds of relationships. First being a symbiotic relationship, which is close and long-term biological interaction between organisms. Okay, so close as in like being actually personally close, and then long-term biological interaction between organisms. So there are several kinds of symbiotic relationships. First we're going to talk about is parasitism. So to the right of parasitism, I have a plus/a minus. And that means one organism benefits and the other is harmed. So we'll go over an example of that in a minute. The other kind of relationship is mutualism. This is shown by a plus/a plus. Both organisms end up benefiting. Yay! And then there's commensalism, where this has a plus with a slash and like a 0. And that demonstrates that one organism benefits while the other is neither helped nor harmed. Okay, so there are several different kinds of symbiotic relationships, and those are just a few. Some of them hurt an organism, some of them help organisms, and then some neither help nor hurt. So this slide demonstrates the different kinds of symbiotic relationships that we talked about on the last slide. The top left being an example of mutualism. There is a species of clownfish, and it lives within anemones. Now you might be saying, Ms. K, how does that benefit both species? Well, the clownfish gets protection. The anemones excuse me, sting and scare off predators of the clownfish, while the clownfish also clean and stop parasites and other things from harming the anemone. So they both benefit. The clownfish gets shelter and the anemone gets cleaning and other healthy regulatory stuff from the clownfish. They both benefit. Then we've got Parasitism. Bottom left, you see this little white-tailed deer buck and a nasty little critter on top of it. That is a tick. Okay, ticks are parasites because they take advantage of their host and they steal nutrients and food and resources from their hosts. Okay, so the tick benefits by gaining food and resources in the form of blood, and the deer gets negatively affected because the deer loses its blood and nutrients. And if enough ticks end up getting on the deer can actually become anemic and get sick and die from that. The other kind of symbiotic relationship we talked about was commensalism, where one is helped and the other one is neither harmed but also doesn't benefit. So this is an example of a humpback whale. And on a lot of humpback whales and other large sea-bearing creatures, we see things called barnacles. And barnacles, if I could get my pen to work, are these little white guys all over the whale's snout. You'll also find them on fins and their, the rest of their body. Well, the barnacles just kind of attach onto the whale's skin and they filter feed as the whale swims about through the ocean. This doesn't really hurt the whale, but the barnacles are able to live happy and healthy this way. However, there is a point where commensalism can turn into parasitism. Having a few barnacles on a whale isn't really going to hurt the whale, but having a whole body full of barnacles may actually hurt the whale because it can't, swim as aerodynamically as it used to, and it may start causing skin irritation issues. But generally, commensalism is it benefits one creature but does not hurt nor benefit the other creature. So a lot of interactions between living and non-living things is due to competitions for resources that affect the relationships. So one type of competition is competing for abiotic or non-living factors. So competing for things like nutrients, space, light, water. Okay? An example of this could be a flower that needs a lot of light, is trying to grow, but is being shaded out by a tree that also takes a lot more nutrients and a lot of water away from the flowers. That flower is likely going to not succeed in that area because the tree is taking it all. Another example, it's kind of neat, but some plants have adaptations to reduce competition with other species as well as their own offspring. You'd think that if I were a tree, I would want all my saplings to do really well, right? Well, some trees, like oak trees, have slightly acidic leaves, and when those leaves fall, it turns the soil kind of acidic, which other plants don't really like. So that's good for the oak tree because that kind of gets rid of competition because it kills off its competitors. But it also makes it really hard for its own seedlings to grow. So the seedlings will find themselves more successful when they happen to be planted farther away. So if a squirrel takes an acorn seed and buries it right at the root of the parent tree, it's likely going to die because of the acidity. The parent tree is then going to be quote-unquote happy because it's not going to need to compete with its offspring to grow and live and make more offspring. But if the squirrel were to carry it, 30, 40 feet away from the parent tree, that acorn will likely succeed and it will take up its own space and take up its own, requirements of nutrients and water and light, and will grow to be a happy, healthy tree that's not competing with its original parent tree. So that's like a success mechanic that species uses, so that way it's not competing with its own species. But then we've got competing for biotic or living factors. So competition with other species for another living or biotic organism. So an example of this would be hawks, foxes, and coyotes. They all like to eat rabbits, right? So they've developed their own ways to be good at eating rabbits, but also they have ways to eat other kinds of species, so that way they're not competing or not fitting within the same niche of each other. The main kind of interaction is predation. So what is predation? Well, it is when one type of organism kills another for its energy. Okay, so killing, consuming, same thing, another organism for its energy. So every single living organism needs energy for the ultimate goal of surviving and making babies. That's kind of the whole point of life when you look at it evolutionarily, right? And in order to survive and make babies, you need to consume or make your own energy. Well, unless you are a plant, you cannot make your own energy, okay? So there's several kinds of predation. First off, being herbivory. Organisms eating plants. Yes, that is a form of predation. Something, maybe like a cow, eating something else, like grass, to gain energy and survive. Okay, remember, predation is one type of organism kills or consumes another for energy. So things that eat plants, herbivory, is a form of predation. So ultimately, without plants, we would be nothing, okay? As plants make energy for others by photosynthesis, they can take energy from the sun and turn it into usable energy for us and other things to eat. How nice is that? Okay, another type of predation is parasitism. We already kind of touched on this. But again, parasitism is an organism consumes its prey while keeping it alive long enough to meet its needs. So a really cool example of parasitism is something called a hairworm. Okay, sounds gross. Well, anyways, a hairworm is a little kind of parasite that somehow finds its way into a grasshopper. And what it does in this grasshopper is it slowly eats the grasshopper's organs. And as it's growing and eating the grasshopper's organs, it's realizing, okay, I'm getting to the point where this grasshopper is going to die if I continue eating it. Also, I am now fat and large enough where I'm ready to reproduce and breed on my own. So what this nasty little hairworm parasite does is it wiggles its way up to the grasshopper's brain. It then, literally mind controls the grasshopper and makes the grasshopper go to a water source when the grasshopper reaches the water source, the hairworm eats the brain and the rest of the stuff that it wants to eat in the grasshopper, and then leaves the grasshopper's husk of a corpse to enter the water where it can find a mate and make more creepy hairworms to then eventually mind control other grasshoppers. That's a cool story. You can't tell me it's not. It's weird, but it's cool. But anyways, that is a form of parasitism. Then we have carnivorism, which is where organisms adapted for eating and gaining energy through meat. So a lion is a carnivore. It has to eat meat in order for it to have energy to live and breed. And then there's omnivores, which are things like several different kinds of ape species. Humans can be labeled as omnivores unless you choose a different, vegetarian diet. But anyways, that is an organism that is adapted for eating and gaining energy from both meat and plant sources. Some organisms' digestive system can only take plant fiber. Some can only take meat fiber. We can take both plant and meat fiber, and we have the adaptations of specially shaped teeth to also allow us to eat both of those. So those are the basic kinds of predation. So on this slide, I don't expect you to take notes. This is just kind of fun extra information, okay? So to avoid predation, several organisms have anti-predator adaptations. And organisms have adapted many ways to avoid getting eaten. We've touched on some of these in survival techniques in our evolution unit. Organisms evolving to be more fit in their environment. Fit again meaning best adapted for survival and therefore reproduction. So some examples of which are cryptic coloration, which is basically camouflage to blend into the background to become more difficult to see by predators. Then there's adaptations to become faster or more mobile than hunters. Gazelles or impalas on the African plain are pretty fast, but over time we might see them become a little bit faster, or able to jump higher, or more unpredictable to stop or reduce the amount that they are hunted by their predators. Then there's adaptations as populations to stay in herds for protections. We see this with like the American bison. They always have large herds. But if you notice, if you've ever seen documentaries on like wolves, the wolves try to eat the buffalo, specifically the injured or the old or the young buffalo or American bison. And what they do to avoid predation is they will group up in large, massive groups with the biggest, strongest, and healthiest individuals on the outside and the young, injured, or older individuals protected on the inside. It's kind of a neat behavior. Then there's adaptations to avoiding handling, which means like thorns on plants or stings by jellyfish. Then we have warning coloration. So bright coloration that basically says, back off, I'll make you sick if you eat me, or back off, I'll eat you first and you'll die from my bite, something like that. And then there's something called Batesian mimicry, which is being harmless and edible, but making yourself look like something that uses warning colorations so predators avoid you. So kind of a bunch of really cool adaptations that animals have used to interact with each other to avoid getting eaten. So this image above, I mean, obviously it's circled, but that's actually a leaf-tailed gecko. Okay, it looks completely blended in with its environment. If you didn't know you should be looking for it, you probably would miss it. Then we've got some sort of a moth here, and its coloration does a pretty okay job of blending in with that tree. If you're a bird flying around 15-20 miles an hour, it would be really hard to see this guy there. These are examples of camouflage or cryptic coloration. Then we have something that's the complete opposite of camouflage and cryptic coloration, and that's warning coloration. These are poison dart frogs. They have very bright, obvious colors that basically say, if you lick me, you're going to die or get very sick, so stay away. Then we've got mimicry. So the top image is a type of moth that has like this really cool design on it that makes it look like an owl's face. Okay, so animals might try avoiding it because they think it's a big threatening owl versus a nice, plump, fuzzy moth nutrient-filled body or whatever. Then below, we also see a bunch of different caterpillars that are taking some sort of mimicry to look like snakes. So a bird might avoid trying to eat these different caterpillars that look like snakes because they think, well, if I go near it, the snake might eat me. So they avoid it. So it's just a type of mimicry that allows them to possibly have a better chance of survival. So interactions between predators and prey are always constantly pushing evolutionary change. We talked about this in our last unit with coevolution, where predator-prey relationships are a form of coevolution, and predators adapt just like their prey does to try to gain a hunting advantage until the prey evolves something that gives them the advantage. So an example of this could be giraffes. Again, even though giraffes eat leaves, it's still a form of predation because the giraffe is consuming something else that is alive for it to live. But anyways, giraffes over time evolved longer necks because the trees have more leaves at the top because there's less competition for those leaves. And also, the leaves up there have less thorns on them. Another example could be populations of cheetahs maybe becoming faster over time to keep up with their prey that themselves are becoming faster, more agile to avoid them. Or populations of snow leopards may be evolving better camouflage so their prey doesn't see them as easy. So these are all just kind of predator-prey interactions and evolutionary pulls that cause them to change over time. So here is an image of a beautiful, majestic snow leopard. Okay, they are solitary creatures that have evolved to live in the mountainous, snowy, rocky areas, hunting things like rabbits and rams and things like that. In this image, it's very clear that it's standing out in the snow, but they have over time evolved to basically have perfect camouflage for the rocky, mountainous areas where they hunt. An example of which is the right image. You see a rocky, cliffy area with some tufts of grass, and you see some sort of ram or sheep species there, but somewhere in this image, I promise you, is a snow leopard. Take a second or two, maybe pause the video, to try to find it. Okay, I'm not going to make the video longer, giving you a few minutes, so pause it if you want. But anyways, the snow leopard is actually right there. Basically perfectly blended in, so if you are a sheep that might not have as good of eyes as humans, you wouldn't be able to see it very well. And another example of a predator adapting to become more camouflaged to gain advantage of its prey or possibly hide from other bigger predators is this species of owl. And so him kind of sitting there taking a nap in the sun makes him look like another branch, which is kind of neat. But anyways, this now wraps up our 10.1 Intro to Ecology and Species Interactions and Relationships lesson. If you have any questions, please stop into any of our office hours, send us emails, things like that. I hope you all are doing well. I hope you're excited for this unit. It's fun. Who doesn't like learning weird animal facts? I miss you guys, and have a good evening. Bye.